In this video, I'm going to show you how you can fix your mistakes in Photoshop by undoing, redoing, and going through the history. Now, here we have an image, and let's say that we wanted to edit this image, and we're going to turn this bottom tomato a green color, like a green tomato that's not fully ripe yet. So, we would take our tool, and let's say we're going to use one of the selection tools here, so we'll use a quick selection tool. And I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, and I'm just going to go ahead and start selecting this. And we might need to zoom in and fix a little bit of the selections. So let's go ahead and make the brush a little smaller. And then I'm going to hold down the Alt key so we're actually getting rid of some of the selection because we selected the red, but we don't want the green. So we're just going to come in here, and this isn't going to be exactly perfect because, this is just a real quick lesson on how to fix your mistakes. So I'm not going to get too detailed in the actual selection, but just showing you one way that we could go about doing this. Maybe I don't want that tomato selected. And if I kind of hover around the edge, it'll select some of this outside for me a little better. And I would spend my time really going in here and making sure that, I do this real nice and neat. But again, this is just a quick example that I want to show you. So it's not gonna be perfect, which is okay. It'll still get the point across. Make sure we don't have this leaf selected, which we do. So I'm just holding down Alt and selecting that green, and then if I need to reselect some pieces, I just let go of Alt, or I guess it would be Option on macOS. And just going around and making sure everything looks pretty good. There's a little piece here we can get rid of. Okay, so we have our selection. Let's go ahead and zoom out here so we can see this a little better. And now we just want to go ahead and change the color of this tomato to a green. So we can use an image adjustment. So I'm just going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and then I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation. And what I want to do is colorize it because I want to pick the color for it to be. So I'm just going to move it along the slider. It dropped down the saturation, so let's just bring that up to the actual saturation that it was. And we can kind of move this around. Typically they go more toward the yellow side. And we'll hit OK. And that looks really good. Now, let's say that we wanted to check the work that we've done and see if it looks good or doesn't look good. Well, the way that we would do that is we could undo by going to Edit and undoing the last thing that happened, which was the hue and saturation. Now you can see that the shortcut key here is Control-Z. It would be Command-Z on macOS. And if I undo that, we can see it go back to the last action that was the hue and saturation. It undid that last action, and now we're back to our red tomato. So if we look under here again, instead of undoing again using the shortcut key Control-Z or Command-Z like most programs, it's actually going to redo the action. So if I click on that, it'll redo that hue and saturation. And then again, if I go back, it undoes. So what happens here is that shortcut Control-Z or Command-Z doesn't just keep undoing like you would see in a lot of applications. It will undo and then redo. And this is a great way for Photoshop to allow us to check our work to see if the edits that we've made look good or don't look good. And so here you can see I can just go back and forth and say, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. We'll keep it. Now, how do we go further back if we wanted to undo? Maybe we made a couple mistakes and we need to go back even further. Well, then we would use the step forward and step backwards. Now, hue and saturation was the last thing that happened, so we're as far forward in the history as we can be, so it's not highlighted here. So we can go backward one time, and you can see that shortcut key is Alt-Control-Z or Option-Command-Z on macOS. So if we step back, it looks like an undo, but we can step backwards again, and now we can step forward because we went backward one time. But if we step backwards again, you might not see anything happen. But I'm going to keep stepping back, and now this time what I'll do is I'll go ahead and use the shortcut key Alt-Control-Z. So Alt-Control-Z, And I'm going to keep stepping back. And you might not see much happening, except it's getting rid of these selections that I was making as I was going in and making adjustments. So you might see some of these marching ants go away. And as we get near the beginning where there were big selections made, you can see them disappearing. So now we have stepped all the way back to the beginning of the history of this document. We can step forward also by using the step forward command, Shift-Control-Z, or Shift-Command-Z, and that will allow us to step forward. So we can step forward, and then we can also step backwards. Now, what's happening here is Photoshop is remembering the history of all the moves that you made in the program. And we can go to Window and History, which is also the tab that is over here. Let's go ahead and maximize this, and we are going to move these down if we're able to. Let's just go ahead and close these tab groups for now so we can see a little more of this. Okay, so here's every action that we made since we've opened the document. You can see that it even recorded the opening of the document, and then all the selections that I made. There were quite a few of them, and at the very bottom you will see hue and saturation, which was the last thing that happened. So as I step forward in this document, again, that's going to be Shift-Control-Z or Shift-Command-Z, you will see that it's stepping forward in the actual history panel, and you can see all of the actions that we made happening on the screen and in the history panel. And of course, when we get to the end, the last thing is the hue and saturation. So that is how we move forward and backward in our history. Undo and redo is going to allow us to go back and forth one time to see the last thing that happened and then redo that action. But the history is what's going to allow us to go backwards and forward. Now I can click anywhere in here and jump to that section. And then I can also save these out by going up here and doing snapshots and different things of that nature that I've shown you in the past. But what you need to keep in mind is if you come backwards in the history and then you make a change, it's going to wipe out the rest of that history. So for instance, let's say right here, I accidentally click and make a new selection. It has wiped out everything past that in the history, including the hue and saturation that we did. So you need to be very careful that when you're going backward and forward in this history that you don't make any changes. And that is why we create a new snapshot for these documents so that it remembers its place in those histories. We can also delete out any of the history, and if we clear history, it's going to remove everything that happened, and it starts back with the last selection that you did, which is the rectangle marquee. So that is how you can fix and correct your mistakes. And again, if I grab, let's just say the paintbrush and I paint, you can see them being added in that history. And then if I want to step backwards, I can, and step forward, I can also do that. So that is how you can fix your mistakes inside of Photoshop. And you can see all the actions that I'm taking here. And I would definitely go about remembering those commands and those shortcut keys so that as you begin working, you can have an easier workflow of fixing or checking out your edits as you move along.